We have Daryl ask, he was looking for some advice on the relationship between runoff EC and feed EC, which I know we covered pretty in depth last week. So it might be a good place to jump over. We got some more questions rolling in here. So if you wanna start with maybe a recap of what we talked about
Yeah, yeah. I
last
won't go
week.
too crazy in depth and
Yeah.
ramble on for too much, but because it is on the videos from last week, I think, or at some point we've definitely covered. But yeah, relation of runoff EC to feed EC, it's always going to change depending on how much the relationship is how much runoff have you been getting consistently beforehand, and that's going to be the big determining factor on more than likely what you're going to see coming out of the bottom. If you have not been pushing runoff at all, you're yeah at for like let's just say a week or a couple days or however long. When you finally do push that runoff, you are going to be flushing out built up salts, and therefore you would expect to see several points higher on there. I mean, it can be considerably higher too, depending on how long you went without pushing it out. The more volume of runoff that's going to go through, the more diluted it's going to get, and that gap is going to get much closer at that point. Whereas if you've been pushing, 30% or so runoff every day, steering vegetatively, using a bunch of P2s, you would expect to see your runoff EC usually no more than 1 to 2 EC higher than what's coming out of the bottom. You're almost always going to see it come out higher than what you're reading on the substrate sensor and what you're putting into the top. Um, Almost always, unless I would say the only times that I ever see where it's not the case is like if you are pushing a significant amount of runoff every day and you are not allowing any type of stacking to occur at all. Let's just say you're putting in, 2.5 EC going in, the plants are actively, crushing, they're eating a whole bunch. You can potentially even see something lower, like 2.5 or something, or I'm sorry, like 2 or zero point 0.5 underneath what you're putting in. But usually it's the other way around. I don't really ever have a cause for concern unless my, EC is significantly higher, like more than 2 EC higher than what I'm putting in. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's the only way that you're ever going to get them to match because some people are like, oh, well, if my sensor reads 3, I'm putting in 3. Or I'm sorry, if I'm putting in 3, I should be getting 3 out of the bottom. The only time that's ever going to happen is essentially during pour throughs or when you are just pushing an ungodly amount of runoff. Where you basically flushed out everything, or the media was like super sterile to begin with. There wasn't any built up salts. There wasn't anything from the fact, there wasn't any like say it was fully buffered cocoa or just completely inert rock wool like that, and it's the very first feed that you put in. That's pretty much the only time you're going to get the same thing coming out of the bottom.
Makes sense there. Alrighty, we got a few more here. Dan, yeah, the past videos should be up on the YouTube channel if I recall correctly. So if you want to cover that, kind of recap in more depth, you should be able to catch that video from last week. It, so we got John with I'm using an 8-inch cocoa block for this next run. How high up should I place the substrate sensor on this cube? I've been using 3 inches high as my loose guide for prior runs, but I'm new to these 8-inch cubes. Thank you.
When you say cocoa block, are you meaning like a square quick fill that was like something where it was compressed and you rehydrated and it looks like a cube now? If
I
so, I'm assuming that is, unless they've come up with some crazy new hybrid of Rockwell that I do not know. But I mean, fuck, you never know. But anyway, if it is just that quick fill cocoa, 8 inches is about a 1 gallon roughly, or what I would assume would be close to about a one gallon. So 3 inches is kind of high. For that, usually 1 gallon, I want to stay between 1 and 2 inches up from the bottom. But really, when you're trying to figure out where should your substrate sensor be placed, what is more important is to get that pot fully saturated with drip emitters. So make sure you've ran those emitters, you've allowed them to, the emitters are on, the runoff is coming out of the bottom, and your substrate sensor reading, like once you've plugged it in, so you plugged it in where it's currently at right now at 3 inches, you want to wait until that VWC reading stops rising and it kind of rounds off while the runoff is still occurring because your drippers are on. Once you've hit that point, we need to look at that number, and that's when we're gonna tune to find out or to set that VWC reading to whatever we want it to be. We've talked about this quite a bit in the past. Again, we should go back and look at that stuff, but this is also covered in the very beginning of the precision irrigation guide that we just put out, where we're going to choose what window, what number essentially we want to assign to field capacity at that point. And we do that by moving a sensor either up or down. So it's fine to keep it at 3 inches where you've got it now. I would turn the drippers on. I would let them run. I would wait until your VWC reading on the sensor stops rising. And then if it is not above 50 or below 65, I would either move that sensor up or down accordingly. Usually, like we said before, about a centimeter of movement is going to get you roughly around a 5% change, and the change is always going to be inverse. So when you move it down, you're going to get a higher reading of VWC, and when you move it up, you're going to get a lower reading of VWC. So that's how I would determine what your right height is going to be for that specific substrate. So, and then with cocoa, if you're using a finely ground, very pithy cocoa with no additives, expect to see probably around a 60%, maybe even up to 65%, depending on how well those layers in between the quick fill hydrates. If you're in rock wool, expect to see 60 to 65%. If you're in cocoa that is more coarse or that has perlite in it, that's where we're going to be on our lower end of the 50 to 55% range, more than likely. But again, there's always going to be one-offs here and there.
Perfect. And yeah, those were those compressed, rehydrated blocks there.
Yeah.
So I think we're all good there. Jump on to the next one here. This one says, "Hey all, I sometimes have issues running 75 degrees Fahrenheit and 55% humidity in flower nighttime. In flower. Nighttime drybacks around 25% in week 4 and burnt tips and running LED Mars Hydro 480 watt. What I see is smaller buds and not really bulking. If this is too cold, what's ideal under ambient CO2 levels? I still haven't dialed it in. Do we use leaf surface temp in our VPD calcs? Am I maybe chasing the environment when it's something else? 6.0 pH, 2.1 EC, Jack's nutrients in cocoa, watering 4 times a day to run off lights at 950 UMOL.
So if you're getting burnt tips, like get rid of everything else there. For the most part, burnt tips are almost always a causation of too much EC in the substrate. So I would rather, I mean, 75 and 55 is about what I run every week, or for the first 5, 6 weeks, in flower at night. I don't think that's going to be your issue. And it really wouldn't really cause that to happen anyway. I see you're pushing a 25% dryback in week 4. Usually in week 4, we are shifting back to a more vegetative steer where we're not going to be pushing those heavy of drybacks. We're usually going to be irrigating with P2s all the way up until lights off. And then we're going to allow the plant to dry back whatever it can overnight as long as it's a minimum of 10%. Yes, to answer your question, I mean, we're going to have to unpack a lot here. There's a lot there. When it comes to do we use leaf surface temp in your VPD calculations? Yes, during the daytime. I guess technically you can at night too, but at nighttime, leaf surface temp is usually pretty damn close to your ambient air temp because there is no lights that are going to be changing up any of that radiation or that heat exposure. So basically, yes, daytime, when you're trying to do that VPD calculation, I do go off leaf surface temperature. And because, again, as we talked about, if you're running LEDs, you typically have to run the room a little bit hotter to get that leaf surface temperature up. And then when you're running HPS, you usually have to run your ambient air temp a little lower. And we don't want that to really mess with things. We more so care about what's actually happening on the plant there. You're at 6 pH, 2.1 EC Jack's nutrients, watering 4 times a day to runoff. You're showing that you're watering 4 times a day to runoff. How much runoff are you getting? I mean, I don't know what your EC is in your substrate. That's going to be a big thing there. I would assume that that's going to be the first place that you want to look, considering that you are having burnt tips. I would make sure that your EC is not that much higher over, if you're putting in 2.1, we don't want to see much over 3, especially come week 4 to 5 and 6. We don't really want to see anything over 1 to 2 EC higher in the substrate than what we're putting in. It's always going to be really, really hard to get it back down to, base level where you're putting in, because you stacked EC. I'm presuming you stacked EC in the first 3 weeks, but yeah, so I would check your runoff, see what your runoff EC is coming out at. I'm going to assume it's probably a hell of a lot higher than 2.1. And if that's the case, I would step up your waterings. I would cut back your dry back here. I would add some P2s in. That way, once you get up to field capacity and you start hitting that runoff, you're going to give a couple more shots throughout the day to move your irrigation in time out, decrease your overnight dry back a bit. And that's also going to in turn push more runoff and get your EC brought down. Um, I would I would do that right off the rip and then kind of see how things are going. So you definitely don't want to do a generative steer in bulk of flower, or you're going to see small buds and other problems, a lot of other problems happening there too. So they don't really care for it.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. This one I think is related to something that used to trip me out when I first started looking at Copilot graphs. But what if you're not pushing runoff, but still not seeing your EC stack? So I'm assuming that's going to be where your lines start getting more in sync with one another instead of having that opposing.
Where do you see that question at?
It's at the top
Oh,
of
oh, what if you're not pushing runoff but not seeing the EC stack? Gotcha. Well, there's one thing that can happen there. I mean, it depends what you're feeding. I mean, can you clarify on what's the strength of feed, what nutrient line you're running there? Um, I could say one of the cases that can help answer this. If you're not giving it enough food, the plant's going to eat, and therefore, if it's taking up enough nutrients of what you're putting in, it's not going to stack, or it won't stack to the level that you might think it would. Another thing is if you're using a phosphate heavy nutrient, those don't stack. They are very, very slow to stack, even not pushing runoff. I've gone 18 days without pushing runoff, and it took me, I mean, I'm saying it took me 18 days to get tip burn before using a phosphate heavy nutrient. So if you're running a sulfate heavy nutrient, it's going to stack a hell of a lot faster. Um, so like I said, we just need a little bit more info on that. I'm happy to revisit that if we need to. But no matter what, it just might take time depending on what kind of nutrient you're running. I guarantee you, if you are pushing in, let's just say for most nutrient feeds nowadays, it is 3 EC. If you're putting in 3 EC consistently every day and you're not getting anything coming out, 3 EC, the reason they go with that, or I can't say this for sure, but the reason I think they go with that is plenty of nutrients. It's actually more than what the plants need. I've never seen a plant eat 3 EC in a day. I've seen them take down like zero point 0.5 out of that, and they do so selectively of each thing. So I know that I get micronutrient deficiencies if I don't feed 3EC, or sometimes even 3EC is not quite enough. So maybe that's just the level for certain nutrient companies where they're like, you got to go to this level to make sure that you have an adequate amount of everything in there that you need. Um, so it could just be that if you're not at that level or you're not pushing it to that extreme where there is going to be an excess, that it's just going to eat it up. So, but if you give us some more information, we could totally look back on that again.
Didn't see anything come up while we were covering it, but if we do, we'll go back to it. This one, it's looks like there's a little bit more detail to this question in the chat, so I'm gonna
Hmm.
hit you with this one in two parts. So Vinny asks, is it suggested to start P1s 1 hour after lights on or 30 minutes? And does this change from weeks 1 to 3 compared to weeks 3 through 6? Um, ba, ba, ba.
Do you want me to answer that one first?
Yeah, if you want. It looks like maybe this other one isn't
Okay.
completely related.
So this is totally up to you, really. And from my experience, what I'm looking for when I'm doing that P0 or the delay from the lights on before I start my P1s is I'm just looking for a visual cue of when does the plant start drinking. Because a plant has to wake up typically when the lights come on, and they're not immediately just going straight to 100% and starting to go and full, full photosynthesis, full metabolic production. They're not getting there right away. They got to warm up, they got to get going. And usually I watch for that dry back, and that can tell me like if you wait 30 minutes and your dry back line is kind of horizontal, maybe slightly sloped down, that's a sign they haven't woken up yet, you know? And then if you wait an hour, you know, that next 30 minutes, you're going to see it more than likely start going. And that's going to give you a pretty good idea of just how healthy are your plants and how comfortable are they in the room, you know? I mean, like I said, we are trying to generate stress during these times, during certain times, generative stress. And so like I'm doing so via drybacks, drought stress, and salinity. I don't really want to stress the plants in any other way. So I like to make sure they're comfortable, they've woken up, they're starting to eat. I can confirm that they're ready to rip. Now I'm going to start giving them nutrients. Some people will stretch that even further because now that they know that that point has hit and the plants have started drinking, and they're ready to start photosynthesizing and doing their thing, they'll actually starve them a little bit further and just to give them a little bit of added stress on top of that. So some people do think that an extended drought time in the beginning of the day is better for generative in weeks 1 through 3. Up to 2 hours I've seen. I've done up to 2 hours. I've also done it down to 30 minutes and everything in between. I wasn't actually really able to tell much difference in all the years that I've been playing around with that. So that's why I kind of default to 1 hour now. So that way it gives me enough time. I can see that they're starting to do their thing. Maybe it produces just a little bit of stress. You know, they're thinking, all right, I'm ready to go. And my water level is getting down to the driest point that it has been in the last 24 hours. So as soon as I start giving them water, they're ready to take it up quick and ready to use it and put it into motion pretty fast. Um, I would say if you wanted to change this up and play around with it yourself, I would steer. I wouldn't do anything less than 30 minutes. And even if I did do the 30 minutes, I would do that in weeks 4 through 6, not in weeks 1 through 3. In weeks 1 through 3, I do an hour the whole way through. But if you wanted to try to steer a little bit more generatively, you can do an hour and a half, even up to 2 hours at that point if you really wanted to. But always pay attention to your plants. Some plants really don't like that. You might try to push your plant 2 week or 2 hours and step it up from a half hour to 2 hours, and you might start seeing, maybe they're not so praying in the first part of the day. Maybe they start drooping down. Maybe they really kind of show you that they're pissed off. So to me, I wouldn't piss them off anymore if you have the choice not to over something as simple as that. I would stick to probably an hour and maybe a half hour increment off of an hour. So if you really wanted to. But again, if you're gonna, I guess to answer your question, weeks wise, generative steer, go a little bit longer, vegetative steer, go a little bit less if you wanted to.
Awesome. Sweet. Second part of this is also from Vinny here. After my initial P1s, I hit my max VWC at 80% in the char core crush pots. 1 gallon with a 4x4x4 cube on top.
Where did
I
you
feed
see
my
this at?
P2 shots
Oh, I
around
see.
72 to 74%, and I hit them with other P2s when it climbs back down to 72 to 74%. However, for my P3 till my very first P1, I will dry back to actual 40%, so a 50% dry back. I'm week 3. How can I decrease this dry back when I'm already at a higher percentage when I hit my P2s? I think this is
Yeah,
probably.
problem here. I'm willing to guess. So you're running Charcore, and the fact that you're up at 80% like that, and the fact that you're drying down 40%, I'm willing to bet you got this weird thing happening that we've seen happen. It's not just Charcore, but the very first couple cases has been in Charcore, but it has also happened in other brands as well across multiple different sensors. Still haven't figured out the rhyme or reason to this yet, but turn your drippers on for 10 minutes and watch and just leave them on. Really, you're looking for a 15 to 20 minute irrigation event with your drippers on. And so what you'll end up seeing, and I know you're like, we don't really want to flush the plants out like that, but the only way to fix this is to run that water over the probe while it's in the substrate. And what you're actually going to find is after 10 minutes, you're going to hit your 80% or 82%. It's going to cap out. After 10 minutes, you're going to see all of a sudden it just starts going down and your VWC will actually fall until it hits, it levels back out where you would expect it to be, probably around 50 or 60%, and then it will flatline at 50 to 60%, and then you're free to shut it off at that point. I don't understand why this has happened. We've had this happen. I think I probably had 10, maybe 12 cases over the last 2 years where this has happened. And that is always the fix for it. So your plant's not actually drinking 40%. You're not actually getting up to 80%. That is a false high number. And you just taking the probe out and reinserting it, a lot of times in these cases does not fix it. I've had people take the probes out and run them underwater, in a sink. It doesn't fix it. I've had people soak them and submerge them. It doesn't fix it. For some reason, the only thing that fixes it is just turning the drippers on and letting it run. I don't know if it recompacts the cocoa around where the tines are and creates I couldn't begin to tell you why this would happen. I have a whole bunch of theories, but I'm just kind of spewing bullshit at that point to actually tell you why. But I do know that if you turn your drippers on for, usually say 20 minutes, you usually will see the change happen and it drop after the 10-minute mark. And then you can pretty much turn it off as soon as it's leveled back out again. And now, be careful too, because a lot of people who've had this happen, they will move their sensor up really high up on the pot trying to counteract this, and it will actually start causing all sorts of issues at that point. So remember, let's get that sensor back down to, what are you in? 1 gallons again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Put the sensor back down to 1 to 2 inches up off the bottom. Turn your drippers on for 20 minutes and tell me if that changes anything. You can always email me and we can go through that, but that almost always fixes that. And then it will usually last. Sometimes it'll last for 6 weeks. Sometimes it'll last the whole rest of the run. Sometimes it lasts 2 weeks. Again, no rhyme or reason. I don't know, but I do know that we'll fix it.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you, John. Appreciate you being here. Make sure this is the same question in both places.
It looks like it.
Yeah, okay. All right, this one's from Ernesto. The most widely used high-quality cocoa substrate available in Brazil for cannabis cultivation has a relatively low field capacity of approximately 40% VWC, both in TerraLink readings and cocoa data sheet. For your reference, the cocoa is called Amafibra Golden Mix 98. Since this is the most used and highest quality cocoa substrate available in the country, what would be your recommendation for steering targets, especially for generative steering, given that when VWC drops below around 24%, I get unreliable EC readings from the TerraLink? The sensors are correctly inserted, positioned approximately 1 inch from the bottom of the pot. I have tested it in several different plants and runs in 5-liter pots with similar and consistent behavior. For vegetative steering, the data looks great. Field capacity at 40% and a 10-point dryback, VWC in the 40 to 30% range. With 1 to 2% P2 shots. I get no false EC readings and the plants look very healthy.
Okay. I'm assuming that this is probably really chippy cocoa, kind of like Rio is.
I can look it up for
Yeah, you
you.
can look it up, but based on what he's saying, that's probably what the case is. I'm assuming you paid attention in the past on sensor placement because you were saying sensors are correctly inserted. Position approximately 1 inch from the bottom of the pot. So there's not much more you can do there. I don't really want to go lower. You, with a chippier substrate like that, you can go in at, I mean, I don't usually recommend this, but you can go in at a slightly declined angle, very slightly. It will give you an extra couple percent out of there. You just don't want those sensors touching the bottom, you know? So I really don't like to do that. But if it's the difference of getting you up to 50% or not, it might be the way to go. Usually with the chippier cocoa too, you don't have to worry about just like this nasty matted soppy compaction that usually you'll get with pith cocoa at the bottom of the pot. So it's a little bit safer to do that at that point. If you're not able to get over 40%, even doing that, then you're gonna have to be forced to use relative steering or cap your drybacks at 20%. So I don't ever recommend going below 20%. You can, you're gonna probably be okay, but if you were trying to avoid bad readings, just know the moment the sensor has deemed anything under 20%, your permittivity levels are too low for it to actually give you good accurate readings. So you can cap it at a relative drybacks, or you could switch it to relative drybacks and just make sure that your minimum floor isn't below 20, or you can keep it on absolute, which is what I would do because it's easier for me mathematically. And I would just make sure that my fail-safe floor is at 20%, and I would make sure that I never go above a 20% dryback. It's not going to be as ideal, but that's kind of really all you can do. Now you could go lower because if it is a really chippy cocoa, like what I'm thinking, I've done this with Rio plenty of times.
Doesn't seem like it is. It seems like it's similar to like Canon Coco.
Really?
It's what it looks like. It's hard to like they don't have pictures on the website, but looking at it on Google
Oh,
Images, most of them it looks like it might be a little bit more fibrous than Canon Coco. Like there's some
but
more.
it's not like Rio or anything, huh?
It's not. It doesn't look like it to me. It looks like regular cocoa.
Hmm. Gotcha. Well, like I said, I mean, I've got the only thing we can do with,
It'd be to do the same thing that you do with
yeah,
Rio.
yeah. I mean, I have gone very, very low with Rio. Just I'm gonna ignore those EC readings. You can go down sub 10. I wouldn't go any. All right, you can go down to 10 if you want. It's not my ideal recommendation. But what does it say? 80% max, friends running crush pots on. Oh, was that in response to the last one?
We're answering for Ernesto,
Oh
right?
yeah, I was just reading Vinny's there.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I don't really.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, 20. Like I said, it doesn't matter what substrate you're in. 20%. If you go below that, you're getting into a territory where the numbers that are going to come in, permittivity wise, are going to plug in, and it's going to give you potentially inaccurate EC readings. You might be safe getting down to like 17, depending on what the whole situation is down there. But you just got to know what you're getting into. It's not like your plants are going to die if you get down to 10% on a substrate that doesn't get up that high. It's clearly holding water somehow in there. It's just not able to be picked up properly by the sensors for whatever reason with that specific substrate. So disregard your EC readings at that point, I would say, or just don't freak out if they're coming out as too high or anything like that. But I mean, the VWC should be relatively accurate, definitely enough to trigger feeds and things like that on at that point. Um, yeah, it's pretty much.
Appreciate you giving us all that info up front, Ernesto. Thank you. Um, cool. So let's look at the timestamps on these real quick. Okay, I think we can go right to Eric's question here in the Q&A. Let me go back to the first question he had. Eric was asking about he's not pushing runoff, but his EC
Yeah, yeah, I
seems
see.
to. That's the follow-up there. I can read it for
Hmm.
everybody. Running Athena Pro liquid line, 2.2 EC, 5.9 to 6 OPH, hitting a max VWC 45%, only getting a 12% dry back overnight, 3 shots, 50 seconds each, 10 minutes apart, 2 hours after lights on. 1 gal quick fill, day 9, I'm starting to see the EC stack now, but when I was shooting for 55%, VWC, I was seeing no stacking in EC, even though I was not seeing runoff when I hit the higher VWC.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, if you're in day 9, you're feeding 2.2. If it's Athena Pro, 3 is what we usually feed from clone. So I would definitely step it up. I mean, shit, when I'm in early flower, I have to feed it 3.5 or else I start getting certain deficiencies in there. So I would definitely step your EC up at that point to 3. Your pH is fine. Um, Hitting a max of 45. is that a max at 45 and you're hitting like that's your field capacity, or are you saying that you can get up to 55? That's what real field capacity is, and you're cutting it short at 45, so that you don't get so that you don't push any runoff. You're only getting a 12% dry back overnight. Um, 3 shots. So you're basically going between 45 and 32 then, or 33? Yeah, 33. One thing you can do there to help make this even easier for you is you can actually step that down to go even lower. So if you got to find what your peak was. So if it was 45 or 55 here, 55 was where you tuned your field capacity to be. You can shoot for, let's just say you're trying to hit a 30% dry back or so for a generative steer and early flower. You would go down 30% from there. So that would be 25% as your minimum floor. You would then work up from there. And so if you're only hitting a 12% dry back, I would go from third or 25 up to up 12%, which would get you to 30 or 25, 35, 37%. So I would actually be bouncing between 25 and 37% and keeping it on the drier half of that spectrum. That's going to also help you guarantee that no runoff is getting pushed in there as well. Um, and I don't know, that's usually how I stack. And you pump 3 EC in doing that, and you're doing it every single day because you've narrowed it down to a 12% window to match what your plants can actually drink. That's going to guarantee that you're going to be giving fresh nutrients every day. You're putting in 3 EC, even if at a smaller amount, every single day like that consistently. Um, you are going to stack EC. It can take 5 to 7 days, even doing that extreme method that how I'm doing it, where I do put in 3 to 3.5 EC and I do run it extremely dry like that with zero runoff. Like I said, it can take easily 7 to 9 days sometimes. Usually it's more on the 5 to 7 days, but so that doesn't surprise me at all. What's what you got going on there, only putting in 2.2, and it's still only being day 9 right now. So again, this is all in the ebook guide, so I would definitely recommend in the advanced strategy section. I explained pretty much exactly how I run through weeks 1 through 3 to stack EC, um, and I would give that a shot and see. But I would, if you were even just to continue doing what you're doing right now, bump it up to 3, you're going to start seeing your EC climb. You're on day 9. It's just going to go slower because you're feeding less and you're also hanging out at the top end of your spectrum. So versus hanging out the bottom end of it.
Makes sense. Cool. All right. So back to Vinny. Let me make sure that that's the correct order. Yeah. So Vinny
This is for
has
the char core.
what's
Yeah.
that?
This is for the char core.
For to run the drippers for 10
Yeah. He's
minutes.
saying it's because I always read 80% max VWC.
Oh
Uh,
no, further up a little bit. Thank you. He says, I have
oh,
2 Netafim
oops.
drippers per plant, 0.5 GPH. If I run
Mhm.
my pump for 3 minutes, it's roughly around 200 mils. If I ran it for 10 to 15
Yes.
minutes nonstop, that's what you're referring to. Yeah. And then he just wanted to make sure that
It,
it wouldn't create any channeling in his substrate.
So, you usually when we do this, we like to do it when you're at least halfway through your P1s or all the way done with your P1s. That way, what's really happening is like I don't want you to do this test in the middle of like what your dry back would be or something and mess up your cycle of everything. You want to get the plant fully saturated. You want to do this when the plant is fully saturated, preferably right after your last P1, because the plant's already at its max water holding capacity at that point. It's not going to notice anything different if you pump water into it for another 10 minutes. All you're doing is just delaying your dry back by 10 minutes at that point. It's not like it's any wetter than it was before because you're at field capacity. Everything that you're putting in is going to come out of the bottom. And you are right. If you were to do this from the point that it was dry and you just turn your drippers on for 10 minutes, you do stand a higher chance of causing channeling. So I am glad that you pointed that out there, because I don't think I mentioned that. But yes, typically I like to wait until they're either halfway up through your P1s, so you at least have saturated your substrate enough to where it can take on moisture efficiently, or wait until your final P1 is done and then just go ahead and turn that valve on. That way, your plant's already at its max water holding, and when you do so, when you stepped it up with drippers at small micro shots, you have evenly saturated your substrate, and so channeling is less likely to occur at that point. Even still, even if it was some form of channeling happening, usually with 2.5 emitters, you're not going to channel all that hard once it's wet. That's just not enough flow typically to cause that kind of channeling in a wet substrate. But even still, I've definitely even done it when it was dry, and it still, for some reason, works. To me, my theory is it has something to do with water passing over the sensors in a low volume for an extended period of time. Maybe it just resets something. I couldn't even tell you. And I did see that there was another one afterwards. Uh,
Somebody had asked about moving into a different pot.
oh, it does. I've seen it follow. I have seen it follow when we moved it into a different pot. It seems to be. I don't know, like the sensor getting hung up on something. And you know, the crazy part is when this first happened, I'm not supposed to use names or anything for companies, but it happened with a customer that was dual reporting. We were doing tests who was also running another company that does substrate sensor monitoring that uses Teros probes. And it happened on theirs, on that one first. And then we were also because we can hook up Teros probes, we can hook up Teralink probes, we can hook up TDR probes. It hasn't happened on TDR probes. It seems to be confined to capacitance-based probes, but it does happen. It's happened on both Teralinks and Teros on multiple different monitoring platforms. We've seen this happen. So I don't think that it is. It is like I said, this is the one thing that perplexes me. I can't say for sure that I thought for sure it was like, oh, it's just Charcore, you know? And I was like, okay, well, let's be leery of that with Charcore because at first it had only happened with a couple customers using Charcore. But then I've had it happen in other brands too since then. And so it's not, I can't say that it is 100% Charcore at all or even substrate related. I haven't really had it happen in Rockwool, so that's one thing to say. But yeah, I cannot pinpoint what exactly it is, whether or not it's a substrate related thing or a sensor related thing. But I have seen that when you take that same problem and you move that sensor to another pot, it oftentimes does follow suit. So that's not a fix for it, unfortunately, because I thought, oh, well, let's just reposition. That seems to cure most of the probe issues that we have. That was not one of them. So, like I said, this is a rare thing. I can count. I mean, now it's probably two hands. But how many cases we've had over the last, I think it's been like 2 to 3 years since I found this. So it's definitely not serious enough to where or like widespread enough to where it's like, oh, this is something that needs further investigation. But it is annoying and it does happen every so often. So, but yeah, let me know if that works or if it doesn't, just email me.
Perfect. Alrighty, we got another one here. This one should be pretty good too. It's from Jake. Regarding transpiration prior to irrigation, is there an ideal way to test slash tell when plants have transpired optimally? We always target minimum of 1 to 2 hours of transpiration time from lights on until the first P1 shot. We start at 2 hours of transpiration time, then we flip plants to flower, but often have to decrease to 1 hour of transpiration when we reach mid-flower or bulk to hit our 30 to 35% relative drive back. Curious if you have a better way to determine optimal time for first P1 shot to mitigate potential botrytis. Might be the same answer you gave Vinny in regards to P0 slash P1 interval, but I'm specifically looking for a way to monitor transpiration. We have a good turgor pressure,
Hmm.
leaf spraying. Historically, I understand that plants are constantly transpiring. It is just monitoring HVAC and plant activity via PIC sensor drybacks. Is there something more we can?
I'm sure that there is some form of instrumentation out there that a scientist has to actually manage that turgor a lot better or in a very specific way. I usually just do so via looks. I don't. unfortunately, I don't do anything more than just looking at the actual rate of dryback. I do pay attention a lot to slopes and the how intense or how gradual a slope is when it comes to drybacks. That's how I can really kind of tell what that plant activity really looks like at any given time. I like, for example, if you were to change your VPD up in the room during a certain half of the day, if you were to um, or if you were to change up your lighting, your light strength, your spectrum, whatever that happens to be, you almost always, when you dive in there close enough, you can see a rate of change, the rate of change of transpiration change. I'm saying change too many times. Change inside the substrate, like when you're looking at the slope of the graph. Um, and there is a mathematical calculation that you can do. It's like what do we do for our slope intercept, where you can actually take a beginning endpoint, a beginning time, an end time, and then a beginning value and an end value, and actually calculate what that slope is. And that's actually what we do in the Copilot program behind the scenes when we're doing all these calculations, is we are analyzing rate of change. So that could be something that we build an app for in the new builder thing that shows you dryback slopes and rates of transpiration. That's actually a really good idea. Maybe we can do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, other than that, that's how I would determine it without having some super fancy scientific equipment that I don't even know if it exists or not. But yeah, in terms of botrytis, you mentioned botrytis there. Curious what you mean by that and what this has to do with it. So maybe you want to elaborate there. Determine optimal time for first P1 shot to mitigate potential botrytis. So yeah, if you want to elaborate on that, that'd be interesting to dive into. I'm just curious what correlation you think those two have. So.
Wondering if the irrigation time and raising the humidity in the room, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't know. Botrytis can come I mean, obviously it's from cold and it's from wet, and it's from cold, wet, and lack of calcium and low pH. So those are like the kind of big main things that cause that. So I'm just curious what that correlation is. I would love to dive into that more if you don't mind answering back here after a little bit. So what's the next one?
All right. Let's jump over here to Eric. So on my other run, I was operating in that lower field capacity from 35 to 20% and seeing the stacking. And then I was told I wasn't watering enough. That room is on day 38, same feed, was doing 90-second shots. Felt like I kept running into the dry pocket slash wicking problem. I was able to get the EC up to about 9/10 by day 22. Now I'm trying to maintain a 5 to 6 EC in medium. I'm maxing BWC in there at 55%, drying to 35% overnight. 4 to 5 P1s, only one P2 after a 3% dryback. Tried to get the handbook, but it never sent to me.
We'll post the link in there again, and if that you still can't get it from that link download, just email me directly, and I can see if I can mail it to you.
I'll drop that in the chat right now, Marcus, but you have to repost it because
Mhm.
it show up for everybody. So I'm putting it in there now.
Okay. Operating in a lower field capacity. When you say that you were told you weren't watering enough, told by who? Was that the program telling you that, or what? Um, 35 to 20, so you're bouncing between 20 and 35. That's a 15% dryback. Seeing stacking, then I was told I wasn't watering it. The room is on day 38. Same feed was doing 90-second shots. Felt like I kept running into the dry pocket with the problem. Um, so on day 30, sorry, I'm just trying to reread this again. I was able to get the EC up to around 9 to 10 by day 22. That makes sense. Now I'm trying to maintain 5 to 6 EC in the medium. I'm maxing BWC in there at 55 and drying back to 35 overnight. I mean, email me privately. I have to look at your data. I'm a little bit confused there, and I just need to see a little bit more info, specifically like your graphs. So if you just email me over your email address, I can maybe take a look at that. with a little bit more there. I don't, I mean, if we've got time, I'm happy to go back into that, but that's a pretty specific nuance thing, and I don't want to kill our time.
I
Uh,
think Eric, you should be able to DM Marcus your email address if you want there.
yeah.
All right.
Or you can just email me. It's the inbound. You can just do consulting@growlink.com and it'll go to me.
Cool. Yeah, and that'll answer the question you just dropped in there, Eric. Consulting at growlink.com. You can hit Marcus up there. Ben, we did do a webinar last week, correct? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's up on YouTube, I think, or it should be.
Perfect.
And if it's not, we will get it up.
And then if you can just repost
Oh,
that link for
yeah,
everybody, I'll read this question from Vinny real quick.
there you go.
So Vinny's asking, he said that he did try to move his sensors around to different
Yeah.
plants and stuff already. But I think the ultimate question is if he runs that test tomorrow, what would he be looking for his true max VWC? I want to say it's going to be closer to 60 than 80, but
Yeah, it's gonna, I mean, I don't know for sure. It's depends on exactly how high up you got it and what, your specific substrate there. Based in a 1 gallon pot, if you got it like an inch from the bottom, like you told me before, like Ray said, I would expect to see between 55 and 60, somewhere around there, but you're going to know when it stops. So it will go down, it's going to go up, it's going to stay up, and then eventually, just when you're ready to give up, everyone's always like, I was about ready to give up and shut it off and call you a liar. All of a sudden, it'll just start going down out of nowhere and it will fall pretty quickly, usually within a minute, and then it will flatline again. And so wherever it flatlines at, that's where your number is. And if that number is outside of the range of where you want it to be, you can go ahead and make your adjustment at that point, just like you would in a normal scenario where you're tuning your fuel capacity. So
perfect. Then he asked if it would be something that he has to do multiple times in flower. I don't think this comes up often enough for you to have to worry about anything.
it's hard to say. Some people, I have worked with some people who've had to do it on at least one sensor every 1 to 2 weeks. They have a bunch of sensors, but it has had to happen here and there, every 1 to 2 weeks. That's on an extreme case. Most of the time, you will do it, and it will at least get you going for a bare minimum of like 2 to 3 weeks on average. Sometimes it'll happen again. What's weird is this doesn't really usually happen when we're steering generatively. This is more of a vegetative steer thing that I've seen occur when we are pretty wet in the substrate. Maybe it does happen on generative, and we just don't notice it because we're not getting up to fuel capacity. I'm not sure. Um, like I said, this is something that I wish we knew more. It's just it hasn't happened enough for us to collect enough data and be able to reproduce it. It's a real one-off thing. And once, Sean at Demeters actually, he had it happen to him, and he's the one who first came up with the solution to this by sheer will. And when he told me that, I passed it along to quite a few people, and it's like usually once they do it, they have now something in their tool belt that fixes the problem, and then I don't really ever hear from them again about it. Because if it does pop up again, say in 3 weeks, they'll just go ahead and do it again. And then that's that. There's a couple of people out there too who do have this happen to them just based on the specific substrate that they're using and they do not want to change substrates. So what they'll do is not in weeks 1 through 3, obviously when they're stacking EC, but for the remainder of flower, they'll actually do a weekly flush, a scheduled weekly flush anyway, just to kind of keep their EC at a baseline, and they just like to do that anyway. And this also will help prevent that for people who do have problems with this. Um, so that's just food for thought there if you wanted to do that. Um, but yeah, you can also try another substrate and see for some people that has worked. Some people it does not. I mean, really, your guess is as good as mine here. The only thing I can help you with is that I know that this does correct it for the most part.
Awesome. It looks like we've hit everything that's come in so far. I don't think we missed anything. Appreciate you guys hopping on here with us today.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Does that mean we're gonna go to the ebook now?
I don't know, we got 7 minutes left, so
I mean, I can get going and start it.
yeah, pull it up.
All
Pull it
right.
up, do a page.
You
Come
guys
on,
got any more
Vegas.
questions? If you guys got any more questions, feel free to put them in, and Ray, you can just stop me. Um, so let me know if you can see that.
It's trying to. There we go.
Okay, cool. So we left off on explaining kind of how autopilot works. So now we're going to go into Copilot. These are the basics. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this because, again, we want to get to the good stuff, but it is important that we cover all of this. So basically, this is just talking about for crop steering. This is not the be all end all, but as the industry seems to know it, for the most part, there is like a standard here with four phases of crop steering, which is P0, 1, 2, and 3. P stands for phase. We just call it phases, phase 0 through 3. Phase 0, like we talked about today on this call, is right here highlighted. It's the time between lights on and the first irrigation event of the day. I do say in the guide, like what I had already spoke about today, a 1 hour delay from lights on is used when steering vegetatively, 1 to 2 hour is used when steering generatively. But that said, I use just 1 hour because I haven't noticed a big difference here. Um, the P1 start delays right here are configured by setting the P1 start time under the schedule tab. So under the schedule tab in the program, the Copilot program, which is highlighted right here, this is the first yeah, we've gone through this a bunch, but this is the first timer under there, the first little timer sequence. This is P1 ramp up. And where you set your start time right here, that is going to be essentially how you indirectly control what your delay is going to be. So if your lights came on at 8:02, you would set this to 9:02, and now you have a 1 hour delay. Um, During this phase, also we also have the targets tab, which is right next to the schedule, and we have this P0 target right here that we can enter in. That's what the additional drybacks are here. This is where we're telling the program this is the ideal dryback that we're trying to target during this time. Um, Again, I just had to do typical ranges here. Drybacks of 1 to 3% for vegetative and 2 to 5% for generative. I almost always default to 2% here again because I'm usually just doing 1 hour. And either way, it doesn't really matter what you put here. Do I have it on here? Yes, this next section. If you configure a prioritization of a P1 start time. And I think we're about to get into that here. P1,
Let me stop you real quick. We got a couple here. Angus, the whenever you go to set up those programs, it just gives you all of the options for all of the different substrate sizes. So even if the module is set for rock wool or all other soilless, you should still see all of those options there.
yeah.
And then we had one last question here, looking for a target day temperature for bulking with and without CO2. Looking for the dense buds.
Let's see, where's it at in here? Right here. All right, so you want my ideal range. This is what I do for my ideal set points. You said what weeks?
He said bulking. So
At bulk, weeks 4, 5, and 6 typically. So my ranges right here for lights on, again, everything in this guide is least surface temperature for daytime. So depending on what kind of lights you're using, that's going to determine what you need that temperature to be. What I do care about though is VPD. So during weeks 4, 5, and 6, notice I am still running pretty humid in here, 0.8 to 1, 0.8, 1.2, and 1 to 1.2. This is a range here. I did have to make this range kind of big considering, there's a whole lot of factors that come into play. Whether or not you've got the equipment to be able to control your stuff at night is the biggest. If you cannot keep your humidity right here, If you cannot keep your humidity in check at night and you're dealing with high swings or just not even able to get down to your target set point, do not run this during the day. However, if you can, this is the best that I have found for myself and for others is to run very, very humid all the way up until week 6, as humid as you possibly can get, within reason, of course. So, like, for example, what this kind of looks like. So if I'm at a leaf surface temp of 82, that's typically like if we're running LEDs, like an 84 ambient air temp, and I'm usually running about 75% humidity all the way up until pretty much until about week 6. Week 5, I'm usually dropping it down to about 70, and week 6, I'm usually hanging out between 70 and maybe 65, somewhere in there. So, like I said, it really just depends on what's going on in the room. But if you want the biggest buds, then you're going to need to give your plant the environment that the most ideal environment that it wants, the ones that is most conducive to maximum growth. So we do not want to be stressing the plant at all at any given time, in my opinion, with when it comes to environment. We are bringing in plenty of stress via irrigation. We don't need to stress it anymore with environment. And however, with and without CO2 is a big, big deal there. Look up, there's a guide by Fluence. I don't know where to find it exactly. Maybe we can try and post it someplace. So I have it saved as a PDF. Fluence Lighting did a really, really good study that did this analysis. Like they did the real scientific studies and work to where they showed what they tracked cannabis and its rate of photosynthesis and its efficiency using uh, leaf surface temps, ambient air temps and all that, VPD, CO2, PPFD. They tracked all of those things up and down and plotted basically where was the peaks, like where was your peak efficiency and where did it start to have diminishing returns and drop off. And so I mean, I've used that since I think 5 or 6 years ago now, and it has really been a great resource because it kind of can tell you, and that's kind of where I get my concept of like, in order to run your plant at optimal efficiency, you have to have all of these things in check. Otherwise, your plant can only go up. Like think of it like a least common denominator, like a musical equalizer. If you had all these knobs turned all the way up across the board, and then one of them was down, that's where your volume is limited to, is wherever that bottom one was. So if you don't have CO2, right, it's not going to benefit you as much to run all of these other things, running it hot and humid and having all this PPFD. In fact, it can actually harm the plant. It can cause like stress because it's almost like choking it out. Like you're basically giving it it's the word I'm looking for, like with a vehicle, you're like tuning it up and you put all this you did all these upgrades and modifications to your engine and then you run it on low octane fuel, and it just can't do what it wants to do because it's not being given everything that it needs to be able to function properly. So to follow any of these, you definitely got to have CO2 in the room, even if it means you getting in there and breathing or putting mushroom bags in there, because we can put out quite a bit of CO2, and so can they. Anything is better than nothing. And the even if you were able to get your CO2 up to like 700 or 800, that is going to be leaps and bounds better than sitting at an ambient, 450 or whatever you're at in your part of the world. Um, but yeah, this is what I recommend. It's going to be in the target section here for weeks 4 through 6, if you want to get the biggest buds. So.
We did get a follow-up for that botrytis question. I just copied and pasted it to you, and then we'll have to find Jake's email, or Jake, if you want to shoot Marcus an email at the consulting@growlink.com. I copied and pasted that question over to Marcus so that way he'll have it, and if you reach out or he can get a hold of you, we can follow up on that one. And then Angus, I think Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Copilot, when you're setting up those programs, we only have gallon options, huh? There's no liter like
No,
pot.
there's leaders. You just have to change your preferences in the top right, I think, of the program
Okay. So
portal.
maybe that's what the issue is there, Angus. I'm not 100% sure, but if you change your units up there, maybe you'll see the um the
It's
leaders.
under top, it's in the very top right of the portal under settings, and then you just go to preferences and you should be able to select what it is.
If you still have issues, just reach up to us at support. Yeah, the both of the options for Rockwool and Cocoa are all they should always all be shown. So if you're not seeing Rockwool options and you're only seeing Cocoa options, definitely reach out to support. If you're not seeing the correct unit of measure, try changing the preferences, and if that's not working for you, then you can also reach out to support. But
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to jump off for today, guys, and
Jake, I can, if you email me, I can answer that privately. So,
awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody being here today. We've had the past few weeks, we've had a lot of participation, so it's awesome.
yeah.
Feel free to let other people know to join as well, because the more the merrier. So appreciate everyone joining.
Yeah. Take care, guys.